Recording. There we go. Okay, perfect. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you guys for joining tonight and making time for this, at this point, third presentation of just in terms of mental performance, two of which were for everybody, athletes, coaches, parents. And then we also did one specifically for coaches, and there are a lot more to come in the new year. So super excited that you guys are here tonight so that we can continue the great work that we started, I think, at this point 2 weeks ago, and that we will continue in the new year. For those of you that weren't able to join last time, I'll quickly introduce myself. For those of you that were there, don't worry, I will not introduce myself every time for the next 3 months. I just figured at this point people may still not know me. So my name is Chloe. I am a mental performance consultant. I have been working as a professional MPC for 5 years at this point, and have been super fortunate to work with a lot of athletes from different sports, different backgrounds, as well as different performance levels. One thing that might be most interesting to you, or at least to your sport, is that I've been working with the Shooting Federation of Canada for almost 4 years, 4.5 years at this point. And so I'm super excited to work with you guys today. As I mentioned last time, because I work with the SFC, I am way more familiar with the Paralympic events, so the ISSF events, but I am always willing and wanting to learn about all the different events and disciplines, as well as different sports. And so if there is anything that you feel would be valuable for me to know in terms of your own discipline, your sport, what you do, always just feel free to let me know. I am here to learn. I have learned a bunch in the last 4 years. I am not the shooting athlete myself. So everybody a part of the SFC were kind enough and supportive to really teach me about their sport and passion. And I'm here to do the same thing today with you guys as well. So I know I can learn from you guys just as much as hopefully you guys will be able to learn from me. And so, yeah, today is kind of the second workshop or presentation of this series that is for everybody before we maybe start splitting between like disciplines and sports so that it can be a bit more specific. But what I really wanted to accomplish with this presentation, as well as the one we did last time, was to really kind of lay the foundation. So understanding, of course, how important mental performance is, what is mental performance, why is it worth for an athlete to prioritize and work on their mental performance, which is what we covered in that first presentation. And today I want to, of course, by the title you can guess, want to talk all about mental training. So today we won't get specifically into like a skill or technique or a specific aspect of mental performance or mental skills training, in terms of, again, how you can apply it, how you can train different skills. That's what we'll do in the new year. Today, it's really all about just understanding what mental skills training is, and also kind of starting to build and develop your own mental skills training programs. So that's kind of, again, today, the goal, and kind of what my goal was and objective in terms of kind of the end of 2024 as we get into 2025, is to really have a strong foundation and understanding of mental performance, what it is, how important it is, and why it's so important, its impact on overall performance, and also have an understanding of mental training, mental skills training, as well as building our own mental skills training program, while having an opportunity to do some reflection and some assessments so that you guys feel equipped and having a great understanding of what is expected of you guys as athletes, but also what is recommended, so that you guys can learn, grow, and see progress in your performance, so that when we get into January all the way through March, that we can target specific skills that we really will kind of dive into and look at the skills themselves, how we train them, why they're so useful to performance. And so we'll get into the specifics of different skills and mental skills in the new year. So with that being said, again, I mentioned it quickly earlier, but I know some of you have joined. Please know that you will have access to the recording of this session, as well as the slides, and also have access to the recordings and the slides of the previous two sessions as well. I have been just running a bit behind on emails and pretty much everything at this point. So I'm quickly or trying to catch up. And so you most likely will have access to all three next week, hopefully. If you have any questions or if you'd like my insight, my thoughts, if there's anything that I can help you with that's from more of an individual standpoint, always feel free to send me an email. My email address will be on the last slide, so you will have access to it, but also I sent you, of course, the invitation for this presentation, so you should have access to it already, but I'm always super happy to write back to you guys, answer your questions, support remotely as best as I can. Again, if you've sent me an email already, it is in my inbox. I've gotten it and I will get back to you as quickly as possible. But yeah, so let's jump into today's topic. So we, of course, I've said, we'll talk about mental training. So what is psychological skills training or mental skills training? So PST, MST, we can kind of bunch them together. But basically, it refers to the systematic and consistent practice of mental or psychological skills for the purpose of enhancing performance, increasing enjoyment, or achieving greater sport and physical activity self-satisfaction. So again, what is mental skills training? This is a big, great way of saying this to train your mental skills, perform better, feel better, and enjoy your sport while seeing improvements in your sport. Of course, as well, it's not mentioned here, but through mental skills training and improving our mental performance, we will also see benefits in our day-to-day lives as well, right? So it is not only limited to sport or physical activity. When we train our focus, when we train our ability to manage our stress, when we train our recovery strategies and techniques, when we make sure that we have proper time management, then we know that all that can be quite useful in our day-to-day lives, our jobs, our personal lives, right? So knowing that training your mental skills will not only be beneficial to your sport goals, but to the accomplishment of your sport goals, but also, again, day-to-day activities as well as well-being. So little quote here, but to uncover your true potential, you must first find your own limits and then have the courage to blow past them. And today, that's kind of what we're going to try to do, is kind of assess where were we at during our last competition season, where do we want to go, where are we now, and then build a plan according to that. So what are the principles of mental skills training? So mental skills training should be systematic, goal-oriented, planned, controlled, and evaluated. I like this quote because I think it really sums up what mental skills training is, but also how alike it is to any other skill, right? I think we often think that when it comes to mental skills or psychological skills or even mental performance, that it's kind of in a category of its own, that we need to have a training plan for the technical and the tactical, and that we will have a training plan for the physical side of our sport. And sometimes we almost kind of assume that our mental skills will just improve by themselves, right? And I can agree to that to a certain point where, of course, we, through just life challenges, will become more resilient. Through experience, we will learn how to see things differently. We will train our perspectives. So, of course, to a certain degree, just getting more experience and learning and growing older will allow us to have made most likely better mental performance, but also that has its own limits, right? As we talked about last time, it is not only a matter of just kind of wait and see until I get better, right? Our brains aren't made for high performance. They are not made for sports performance. And so therefore, if we really have great performance goals, regardless of what those performance goals are, whether it is to have your own PB, whether it is to win a certain competition or attend a certain competition, whether it is just to have fun, whatever it may be, if we want to be able to accomplish all those goals, we need to really prioritize our mental skills training and also understand that it is not something that will just end up naturally like happening, right? Often when we don't train something, especially if we've identified a gap or something that would be worth working on, if we do not address it, then with time, it might actually get worse. And so, of course, we want to pay attention and notice what are the things that we need to work on, but also understand that whether we have significant gaps or weaknesses, or whether we're doing great and we're enjoying it, that when it comes to mental skills training, when it comes to wanting to improve our mental performance, it has to be basically treat it the same way you would treat any other skills training, right? The same way you go to practice and regular training to improve your technical and tactical skills X amount of times a week. The same way you go to the gym or you go for a run, although now it's starting to get slippery. But when you would go for a run outside or whatever it may be, you would plan that, right? You would schedule it. You have goals you want to accomplish. And so the same way you would do all these things, we want to do the same things for our mental skills. We cannot just wait and kind of cross our fingers, hoping that our mental skills will get better with time and our mental performance. As I've said, of course, it will just naturally with time kind of get a bit better. But when it comes to specific performance outcomes and goals, the impact will not be significant enough that you will see improvements in your performance. And so we want to be, again, super deliberate with it. We want to plan it. We want to have goals. We want to evaluate it. We want to make sure it's systematic and controlled. Basically, we want to train and we want to treat our mental skills training the same way we would any other type of training. And so one thing that's super important and hopefully that you guys can take away from today is that mental skills training is very similar in terms of approach and kind of principles as any other types of skilled training. We, again, often put it somehow in a different category, but we need to understand that it's not. Of course, maybe some of the concepts might be different when it comes to, again, the amount of time that you need to spend at the gym or at a training session will be probably most likely very different than the amount of time you need to put on your mental skills training. But nonetheless, you have to put time and effort into it. And that is what I really want for us to kind of get from this conversation is that we need to treat it just like we do everything else and that it does not just happen on its own. We need to put in time and effort and energy to see improvements in our mental skills and in our mental performance. So kind of if we kind of break it apart here, when it comes to the different principles or characteristics of mental skills training. So for one, what we mean by systematic. So mental skills training should follow a structured approach. So basically progressing step by step, right? It should be kind of like a ladder where you kind of go up the steps that are structured and planned. Each stage builds on the previous ones, right? So the same way when you come to strength training, you would continue to build up, right? It's the same thing when it comes to our mental skills. So of course, you want to ensure that nothing is overlooked and that the process is quite comprehensive, right? So you really want to dig deep. You want to make sure that it's well planned, well thought out, that we have steps that make sense, that we're not trying to jump and take leaps that aren't realistic, while also making sure that we continue to make it harder for ourselves, more challenging, and therefore we see growth. When it comes to our mental skills training, when we're saying planned and controlled, well, for one, mental skills training requires thoughtful preparation, including timelines, specific activities, and milestones to ensure the process is intentional and effective. So again, it does not just happen that I am now training my mental skills. It needs to be planned. It needs to be prioritized. I need to know, how am I training these skills? What am I doing? What are the key milestones? What are the kind of steps I want to hit by a certain point? Again, it needs to be planned. Oops, letting somebody in here. Perfect. So we want it to be planned. We can think of a lot of different skills, but even let's say we're thinking confidence. Again, confidence isn't just something that happens one day, right? You have to put in effort and time, and therefore you need to plan it. How will you improve your confidence over time? And so I need to know how and when and why and the what, right? When it comes to controlled, so basically you want for the training to be monitored, right? So that we ensure that basically you're adhering to your plan and you make adjustments if needed. Often when it comes to control, that's where you can have support as well, right? From MPCs and coaches and people around you that can help you kind of do these quick check-ins in terms of, again, asking yourself, how is it going? Do I need to adjust? Is it too hard? Is it too challenging? Is it realistic? Sometimes, again, when it comes to the planning, and especially if we're feeling super motivated, we may set goals or we may set steps that aren't realistic at all. Going from no meditation at all to wanting to meditate for 30 minutes every day might not be realistic, right? And that comes in, that will tie into the goal oriented portion, but still, that's where that control piece is, where we need to check in and make adjustments if needed. Like if I feel like this isn't realistic anymore, can change it. Same way you would, let's say, if you've planned on working out 5 times this week and now you've gotten sick, you need to adjust it. You're going to take an extra rest day. Maybe you won't train at all this week. Maybe the high intensity cardio training you had planned will now become mobility or stretches, right? Well, it's the same thing for mental skills. With time, I'll have to make adjustments. I'll have to address certain challenges, things that I maybe couldn't plan for or prepared for. I will have to adjust it, right? So the same way you can have a training plan for something that's super technical and then you're still kind of stuck on the previous step and can't move forward, then what we're doing is just kind of being flexible and changing the plan according to where we're at and the progress that we're seeing. So same thing for your mental skills. So we will have an initial plan, but we also need to, again, have check-ins and reflection and kind of do these self-reflections where we now ask ourselves, do I need to adjust? Do I need to change things? Do I need to make it more challenging? Where am I at? And can I still follow my original plan or do I need to change it? And that is, again, what we usually do and would see with any other type of skill training. When it comes to goal oriented, so of course, training should have clearly defined, challenging, and achievable goals, right? We do not want to just start mental skills training without really knowing what we want to accomplish or where we want to do, where we want to go, or how we want to feel, or which skills we want to do or use, right? And so we want to have goals. We want to know, where do I want to be a month from now, a year from now? Which skills do I want to see improvements in, right? So I have to set specific goals. And then, of course, those goals will be guiding the strategies and exercises that you will implement in your daily training, right? And so, again, just like everything else, when it comes to the technical, the tactical, the physical, we have goals. There are things we want to accomplish. Same thing for mental skills training. And then lastly, mental skills training needs to be evaluated, right? So success and progress should be measured using either feedback. So feedback can come from coaches, teammates, other athletes. It can come from parents. It can come from IST members. So that could be, of course, MPCs, sports psych therapists, basically anybody that's around you that you know will provide insightful and valuable feedback. Assessments are also quite helpful. So we will do one of those today. Sometimes it's quite hard knowing which assessment is reliable, which one we should use. Of course, I'll be happy to help you guys with that. Today, we'll do one that covers 12 different mental skills. It is quite broad, but we need to keep in mind that when we want to evaluate the performance of one specific skill, that there are assessments at this point, which is great because there's been a lot of evolution in terms of what we have access to in terms of assessment for mental performance, and especially sport specific mental skills, that there are basically assessments to cover every skill possible. And so if you have interest in that, then I can make those available to you. And then lastly, outcomes as well, right? And understanding what would be the outcome of our mental skills training and our mental skills training program. But also sometimes, although we do not want to focus on outcomes, we want to focus on the process, knowing that outcomes for competitions, PBs, improvements in scores can also be used to evaluate our mental skills training. So again, that's not what we want to focus on, but we need to keep in mind that that's data that we can use, right? If one of the skill that you wanted to train or one of the things you wanted to improve was to be and see more consistent results between kind of your results of training and your results of competition, which often we see athletes struggle with. They do really, really well practices, but yet when they go to competition, they do not, which of course you'll have to work on different skills when it comes to that. But using your scores and now seeing that they're quite close and consistent between practice and competition would be a great way to evaluate the effectiveness of your mental skills training program, as well as the improvement in terms of your mental skills. We know that there's a lot of different things to consider, of course, and I'm not saying that it is just take the numbers for themselves, but I'm just saying that sometimes scores, of course, can be helpful when it comes to evaluation. Shouldn't be the only thing. We're talking feedback, assessment, self-reflection can be a big one as well. but just know that it is a piece of information and it's not the whole story, but it is one piece of information that we can look at. So again, evaluations allow us to understand what works, what doesn't, what are the areas for improvements, but then also super importantly, celebrating growth, right? When we do these evaluations, regardless of which type, whether it's again, reflections, whether it's assessments, whether it's getting feedback, whether it's looking at actual outcomes, it is great. And it creates an opportunity for us to celebrate our progress, our growth, and just kind of give ourselves a bit of pat on the back and really appreciating all the time and effort and work that we've put into this and seeing how it translates in terms of progress. Oops. There we go. A few additional key considerations when it comes to, again, mental skills training. So for one, we want to kind of adhere to all the principles of deliberate practice, right? You need to have the intention of improving the said skill, right? Again, it does not just happen on its own. I need to want to train a skill. And therefore, again, everything else when it comes to planning it, scheduling it, all of that, that I need to have that initial want and motivation to train the skill. Otherwise, we will not see growth and improvement. We also need to take into consideration progression, right? So we, just like any skill, want to build it up, like build up our training, right? So we want to take into consideration whether, again, daily training versus during practices training or during training. But we want to be able to kind of build it up in a way that there's logical steps, again, where we make it either more challenging for ourselves, harder with time, but where we see growth, we see progress, where we test ourselves a bit more. So again, we want to see that progression, knowing that there are certain skills that we will want to try and train kind of day to day on a daily basis. There are other skills that might be practiced or in training specific. I'm using the word practice here just so that we don't say training or real training or mental training. So during practices training, so we kind of have to understand which one's more challenging, which ones we need to prioritize and do at home, which ones can we do at the range, which ones should we do at the range, which one should we do at home, do we start at home and then bring it with us at the range, basically making sure, again, that there are logical steps. You, of course, want to kind of progressively get to performance specific focused, right? So for your mental training to become more performance specific. So you might start using a skill during practice and then wanting to implement it during a simulated match and then wanting to implement it during an actual match, right? So that's where you also see the progression. Practice, often very low risk, safe environment. Of course, an environment, when I mean safe, hopefully all your environments are safe, but more so psychologically safe, where we feel we can make mistakes, we can try new things, we can get out of our comfort zone. Of course, we know that we can use actual matches to do that, but often actual matches are an opportunity to just test and put everything together that we really have worked on. So again, going from maybe something that is their lower pressure expectations, that's also maybe not as important, and not that practice isn't important, but often there are way more practices in actual matches, and so therefore we can afford to use practices to try new things, but also to just make mistakes and kind of completely miss the mark so that we can correct it next time. So maybe going from using a skill of practice and then simulation match or competition and an actual match, actual competition. When it comes to like the time, so things that we need to consider. So usually when it comes to mental skills, 20 to 40 hours are needed to get competent at a certain skill. Of course, you do not have to time yourself to know if you're at 19 hours or 20. But just keep in mind that when we're talking that for a new skill, we recommend that you work on it for maybe 15 to 30 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. That it means, of course, a lot of time and effort before getting quite competent at a certain skill. So again, for new skills, that's usually what we recommend. You will see that it's quite similar in terms of frequency as what we would see for actual like strength and conditioning, right? 3 to 5 times a week. Of course, a bit shorter in length. When we're talking mental skills, we need to consider that, of course, you've had a busy day at work. You also have had training. So we're not recommending that you do hours on end of mental training, but more so like 15 to 30 minutes of high focus, high quality training can be very beneficial. Sometimes it could be kind of broken into different skills, different techniques. Maybe it's like before the practice, maybe it's after when it comes to maybe journaling or reflection. Maybe it's just one drill out of your whole training session that is dedicated to mental training. And then we need to keep in mind that when it comes to like first exposure, something that's completely new skill. So we'll have to consider or take into consideration that it will take 3 to 6 months from learning to being able to implement it during a competition. So if you are 100% beginner at a certain skill, then we need to keep that timeline in mind. So for example, if you've never used imagery ever, you've never done any type of visualization, never done imagery, really struggle seeing clear images in your mind or seeing scenarios that would be kind of competition specific, that for that point on until you can actually maybe use imagery the morning of a match as part of your pre-match routine, that it could take up to like from 3 to 6 months, of course, depending on the amount of time and effort that we put into the process, but also kind of what's our starting point, knowing that we all have our strengths and things we need to work on. So I think it's important to just keep that in mind. Again, just to reinforce this idea that mental training requires time and effort and work the same way any other type of training would. And when it comes to the just process, so of course we need to consider that it is a process, right? And so of course it is a continued process so that you ensure retention of skill, right? So it's not like you will work on something and then completely forget about it for years and then get back to it. We of course have two main phases, building and maintenance. So building is when you're actively working on a skill, whereas maintenance, of course, it's more so kind of keeping or your performance at said skill remaining the same, being consistent, maintaining. So we need to keep in mind that even when it comes to maintenance, you are still consistently reviewing these different skills, using them so that we're not always kind of going around in circles where you may have worked on something years ago and now you have to work on it again, right? It's more so, again, these logical steps where I am now acquiring or building certain skills, and when they reach a certain level and they're not priority anymore, it's not that I just forget about it. I continue to use them, but I maintain them so that I can continue to work on other skills, and therefore I keep going up, I keep improving. And the best way to do all these things when it comes to mental skills training and making sure that we are taking in all these considerations, that we are following the different principles here, is to build a mental skills training program. So as I said earlier, the same way we often have a training program for our technical, tactical, and physical skills, we want to have one for our mental skills, because when we build a program, it will be a lot easier to then take into to make sure that our training follows these guidelines, right? Having a program allows us to be super systematic, right? So we'll have specific steps. Having a program itself makes it planned. Having a program that you will go back and review makes it controlled. To build your program, you need to know what your goals are, and also having a program in place that includes assessments and reflection will ensure that your mental skills training is evaluated. And so one thing, though, of course, that I want to be kind of mindful of, and what we will be looking into today, is that you guys often, and from what I've learned of shooting, you guys are amazing and awesome and part of a great community. But from my understanding, sometimes there are a lot of things that you guys have to do for yourself, right? I don't know if you guys have access to other MPCs and if you work with other people. And if that is the case, amazing. If you feel like you have your support system and group around you that helps you, that is awesome. But again, from what I know, sometimes having access to different resources is limited, right? The same way in certain sports, the MPC will build the mental skills training program for their athletes, right? You may not have access to that. And so what I want for us to do today is looking at how can you build your own. And of course, I'm saying this knowing that I will be super happy to review your programs. Like if you want my insight, if you want me to help you and support you while you're building your program, I will be super happy to. But we also need to, of course, take into consideration that we do not, of course, work together enough that I can just give you a program, right? And everybody is so different and unique, and you all have different goals. And so you are at this point in the best position to build your own programs. If you have access to coaches that have the knowledge, but also the time to help you with yours, amazing. I just know that you guys are often, again, in shooting from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are usually super independent and awesome at kind of doing your own things and doing your own yearly training plans and choosing which matches you'll go to and where you'll travel and what you want to train. And so therefore I want to equip you guys with kind of the information and knowledge in terms of how can you build your own mental skills training program. Well, I still keep it in mind, as I've mentioned, I will be super happy to review your programs if you are interested in that. If you want my insight, if you have any questions, whatever it may be, I am here to help as well. I just feel like it would be way more realistic for you to know how to do this for yourself, or at least have or feel a bit more comfortable doing that for yourself, instead of just kind of waiting until a program's given to you, knowing that in kind of your sport, but also in this situation, that most likely will not happen. And because all of you here are super motivated to make mental training a priority, I figured let's understand how to build your program, and then you'll have until now and even like January to maybe start building it. And of course, you can do that on your own, kind of in your own timeline. If you want to do it in February, then of course, very up to you. But you kind of start thinking, what would my plan look like? And then our goal in January is to give you the tools and techniques and skills that will now bring your program to life. So with that being said, how to build our own mental skills training program. So for one, what we want to keep in mind and understand is that there is a difference between mental techniques and mental skills. Both will be a part of your program, but often your mental skills are the ones that you will kind of prioritize in terms of these will be kind of big lines, will be your mental skills. Mental techniques are the strategies that help you build your mental skills. So often when we're talking mental programs, the same way, let's say we're talking strength training. So if you're talking strength and conditioning, so for example, the skills you would want to work on are flexibility, strength. It could be power, right? And then you can see the techniques as the actual like exercises, the things you will do to build strength, the things you will do to build flexibility, right? So mental skills are kind of the key concepts and components of our plan, while the techniques are what help us improve our mental skills. So I know we looked at a list of mental skills last time, but here's a reminder as well as a few kind of just to give you an idea of what different mental techniques are. So mental techniques, again, are a cognitive or practical technique that helps to build mental skills, whereas mental skills enables you to regulate your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So a few examples of mental techniques, we have, of course, breathing techniques, journaling, feedback, self-talk, meditation, action planning, cognitive reframing, imagery, reflection practice, activation strategies. So these are techniques that we will use to build our mental skills. Mental skills are things such as motivation, resilience, confidence, self-awareness, stress management, attention control, refocusing, emotional regulation, arousal control, imagery, and many more. You guys may have picked up that imagery is in both. The reason for that is that imagery itself is a skill that we want to train and work on. We can use, of course, imagery to better prepare for our performances. So working on that skill, so learning how to see pictures, see clearly, hearing in your imagery for the pictures to be clear, for your imagery to be kind of flexible, for you to be able to really change what you're seeing at your own will. That is you training mental skills, your imagery, sorry. Whereas imagery as a mental technique could be that I am training confidence. But so therefore, I will use an imagery scenario of seeing myself being successful, or seeing myself kind of reliving a time that I felt confident or I felt successful, right? So I'm now using imagery as a technique to train confidence. Whereas if I'm just doing different strategies and different techniques, to learn how to do imagery, then imagery is the skill that I am training. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's kind of the difference. And you'll see that, again, some are, so imagery is in the two, because training imagery and having imagery as a skill that you master, or at least a skill that you have a good performance in, then imagery can become a technique to train other skills. So here's the difference. So when we're talking mental skills training program, of course, what we will see are the skills you want to train. But of course, we want to keep in mind and understanding when we dig a bit deeper, knowing what are the techniques I'll use to train this skill. And so today, again, focusing on the mental skills training program. And the goal in the new year will be to see what are the techniques that will allow me to train said skills. And so how do we build kind of our mental skill training programs, right? What's the process? So for one, what we want to do and what we want to start with is over here to the left, right? And so we want to first start with reflection, right? We want to be able to reflect on our previous performances and knowing, again, what worked well, what didn't, where do I want to go, what do I want to accomplish, what are my gaps, what are my strengths. We also want to, again, assess our needs at this point. What is it that I want to prioritize and need to work on? Based on that, I will then create my mental skills training program, which through and a part of my program, I'll learn about the different mental skills and techniques. And then lastly, I will implement said skills. And so what we will do today is we'll do a bit of that reflection piece. We will assess your needs today. Hopefully with time, you guys will be able to create your own mental skills training program. And then in January until March, we will learn about the different mental skills and techniques so that the ones that are part of your program, you feel a bit more equipped to train. And then you can and then you can use these skills in training situations as well as in competitions. There we go. So we'll start with the reflection. So of course, as we said, we want to know where were we last year. When I mean last year is kind of from now on looking back, and especially looking at your previous competition season. So I know, of course, everybody's maybe a bit different. Maybe some of you just compete every week and have like matches every week. Maybe some of you have competitions you've attended, like nationals, for example, or other local competitions that you've attended. Maybe there's usually a time of year where you travel a bit more for shooting, maybe not. Basically, we want to look at your previous competition season. We also, part of the reflection and kind of asking questions, we want to look at our next competition season, right? So next year could be as in 2025, but it can also be in terms of our next competition season, doing a bit of that reflection exercise and asking, well, where do I want to be? So I want to know, where was I for my last competition season? Where do I want to be for the next competition season? And of course, reflection means asking ourselves questions. And so I have a list of questions here that hopefully can guide and help you when it comes to your reflection process. Of course, you do not have to right now write it all down, answer all these questions. I would encourage you to maybe just quickly while we're going through them, kind of answer them quite quickly. You can also make a few notes, but hopefully what you guys will do is after this meeting presentation, when it is not 8 p.m. on the Thursday night, that you can maybe dedicate time, sit down, and really answer these questions for yourself. So when it comes to reflection last year, we want to ask ourselves things such as, how was my performance? Did I achieve my goals? How was my mental performance? What are the gaps, or what were the gaps in my performance? What were my strengths? What went well? What didn't? How about in training or in competition, right? What went well? What didn't? Training, competing, or matches.
No, but
What are the...
Oops.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So what are the mental skills that I was able to use effectively in competition matches? What are the mental skills that I struggled to use effectively in competitions, and was my performance where I wanted it to be? So again, maybe aligned with my goals. And there are many more questions that you can ask yourself, but basically, what did last year look like from a goals, mental performance, overall performance, strengths and weaknesses, and mental skills standpoint? With that exercise being done, what we want to then ask ourselves, where do we want to be, right? So we know where we were last year, where do we want to be next year? So again, where do I want to be? What do I want to achieve? What are my goals? What do I want my performance to be like? How do I want to feel when I compete? What do I want to be successful at? How do I want to feel before matches? What skills do I want to be able to use effectively? What strengths do I want to use to my advantage? What areas do I want to see progress in? What are my priorities in the next year? What will my schedule be like, right? Will there be changes in terms of training and scheduling and maybe work and life, right? Are there any expected changes that I need to take into consideration when building my program? So again, same thing here. You know, I have to answer all these questions right now, but as we said, when it comes to building our own mental skills training program, but when it comes to mental skills training altogether, we need goals, we need direction, we need steps. In order to set those steps, though, we need to know where we were, right? We need to know what our starting point is. So here are a few simple questions that you can ask yourself to do that reflection piece, because as we saw earlier, reflection is first piece. I need to reflect on my goals, where I want to be, where I was. I then want to assess and evaluate, where am I now? So of course, if I look back at the start of last year's competition season, I may feel very differently now. So I want to, again, know where I was last year, last competition season. I want to know, where do I want to go? And then I want to assess, where am I at now, right? What's my starting point now? So that based on what I've experienced before, based on where I want to go, and now with the information that I have in terms of where I am now, I really have all the information needed to build my mental skills training program. So a few questions here when it comes to the now. Again, it's asking ourselves, where am I right now? What are my strengths? What do I want to work on? What are my gaps? What do I need to improve about my mental performance? Where are the gaps in my overall performance? And so asking, of course, ourselves these questions. And again, we can be and add probably 100 more to this list, but really assess, where am I at this point? The thing that's great, though, about evaluating and assessing the now, and as we know, very important with mental training to evaluate our progress, is that if you feel like it's hard for you to know exactly where you are at this point, you can use assessment tools and questionnaires to get more information about your performance, or sometimes to maybe have more specific questions when it comes to our different mental skills, which is why today, together, we will use and do an assessment tool that is called the ONTSAT3, or the Ottawa Mental Skills Assessment Tool. So as I said earlier, to those of you that kind of logged in early or on time, I encourage you guys to grab a sheet of paper. It could be your iPad, could be your phone, could be your computer, but you will have to write a few numbers down, considering, of course, that we will all have different answers to the different questions. The way we will proceed when it comes to you guys writing down the answers, I encourage you to write the number of the question. So I think there's 48. So numbers 1 through 48. And then beside it, write your answer. So basically what you will have to do, it says here, please circle, because it is usually a PDF, or there's actually an app for it. But for you, it will have to be, you write down the actual number, your result, your score. So that indicates your level of agreement with each of the following statements. There are no right or wrong answers, so please give your immediate and honest response, right? So that is the same thing with every assessment that is kind of basically a self-assessment, self-reported. You just have to go with the first thing that comes to mind, be as open, as honest as possible. especially at this point, nobody will see your answers. I will not see them either. So please do not write down what you wish you were able to do, or who you wish, like what you wish your strength would be, or what you think might be the right answer. Again, we're doing this a bit differently, where you're doing it like for yourself and you're the only one that having access to the results. The reason why we're making a point of mentioning this is that at times I'm the one administering the different assessment tools. And sometimes, as we know with athletes, their will and want to perform also translates even in assessment tools. And we do not want for you guys to say what you think is right, but more so how things are. The reason why it needs to be immediate is that often we will go with like our first thought and answer, and that will be kind of the truest one. When we take more time, we tend to change our initial answer, and most often not for the better. So sometimes, again, I might think, oh, I agree with this. And then you start thinking, well, no, not this one time. And then this time I didn't. And then, yeah, I'm not as good as this guy. And then we change it, when initially our first answer was actually the one that was closest to reality. So go with the first thought. You want to, of course, answer all the questions. Of course, again, keep in mind, this is up to you. I will not know if you're doing this or not. Hopefully you will be. I think this is a great tool to use. And what you want to do is you want to think of your most recent performances in your sport, whether training or competition, while you're responding to the items. So you do not want to think back 2 years ago, kind of the peak of your season 2 years ago. You want to think of your most recent match, most recent training session, or recent training sessions. Sometimes we can kind of clump them together, but we want for it to be quite recent and relevant, because remember, we did the reflection piece. We looked at the past. We figured out what we wanted in the future. Now we want to assess the right now. So we really want to look at the most recent ones. And you have the scale right here. So of course, again, level of agreement. So ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So 1 through 7, those are the numbers you'll want to rate. So again, you want to rate question 1, 3, question 2, 4, whatever it might be. The scale will be shown in all the different slides, so you do not have to write it down or remember it. With time, it'll get just more comfortable. You'll be able to go through it. And basically the way we'll do it is I'll read through the statement, wait a second or two, and then read through the next one. And so if you guys want to kind of jump ahead, great. You'll just have to wait until I finish reading all of them before I skip to the next slide. If you guys have kind of not been paying attention to what I've been saying, then of course you can read on your screen here, but just know that I will skip to the next slide. Please though, this is an official assessment, but also we're doing this part of a workshop. And so if you want me to go back and read a question again, I will gladly do it. And then this will also be made accessible to you guys after the presentation. So I think, yeah, let me know if you have any questions, but I think I've made an okay job at explaining the assessment tool and how it will work. So there we go. So you have the scale on the left. So the first question, oh, that's inconvenient. I have the Zoom thing is right in my face. Okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. So the first one is I set daily goals. So write down 1 to 7. Do you strongly disagree with that? Disagree, somewhat disagree, don't agree, don't disagree. So neither, somewhat agree, or strongly agree with this statement. I set daily goals. I believe, so that's the second one. I believe I can succeed in my chosen activity in spite of any obstacles I encounter. 3, I find it easy to relax. 4, there are a number of things in my sport that are potentially dangerous and make me afraid. 5, I can increase my energy level when I am tired in training. 6, I experience performance problems because I am too nervous. 7, I am determined to never give up in my sport. 8, I lose my focus during important competitions. 9, I find it easy to create mental images. 10, I set difficult but achievable goals. 11, I plan a regular set of things to do before competition. 12, I act confidently, even in difficult sports situations. 13, I mentally practice my sport on a daily basis. 14, my body tightens unnecessarily in competition. 15, I lose my focus during daily training. 16, I find it difficult to train because of the fear involved in my sport. 17, I am committed to becoming an outstanding competitor. 18, I find it easy to change images in my mind. 19, I can consciously decrease the tension in my muscles. 20, I can increase my energy level when I am too relaxed in competition. 21, I mentally practice my sport with maximum performance in mind. 22, mistakes often lead to other mistakes when I compete. 23, I set goals to improve daily aspects of my performance. 24, I am afraid to lose. 25, I plan a regular set of things to think about before a competition. 26, I have clear mental images. 27, I find it hard to regain control after getting upset during a performance. 28, I believe I have the personal capacity to achieve my goals. 29. I find it easy to relax quickly. 30. I am willing to sacrifice most other things to excel in my sport. 31. I find it difficult to concentrate in certain situations. 32. I find that big crowds get me nervous in competitions. 33. I can feel movements in my imagery. 34. I find it hard to get an unexpected event off my mind during competition. 35. My mental practice is planned. 36. I compete better in practice than I do in competition. 37. I can easily activate myself up to an optimal level where my performance is at its best. 38. I have difficulty finding effective strategies to remain focused throughout an entire competition. 39. I feel more committed to improving in my sport. Wait, I feel more committed to improve in my sport than anything else in my life. Sorry about that one. 40. I plan a regular set of things to do during a competition. 41. My goals push me to work harder. 42. I can relax effectively during critical moments in a competition. 43. I find it hard to gain control of things to reduce my fears in training. 44. I dwell upon mistakes during training. We're almost there. 4 more. 45. I mentally practice for critical situations in competition. 46. I can easily activate myself before a competition if I am down. 47. I have a plan that includes certain keywords I say to myself in competition. And the last one, 48. I am confident in most aspects of my performance. I'll give you guys a minute to write everything down. The reason why I'm reading through it all is that we know and kind of get through a pace instead of just kind of having to ask you guys every time. If I can change to the next slide, hopefully it wasn't too annoying. Other than I think it was 39 that I messed up, but shouldn't impact the results too much. So yeah, so now what I want for you guys to do is to basically, let's get our scores. And so what you'll want to do is you'll want to do an average of the scores, each of the scores for each skill. And so the questions that assess goal setting were question 1, 10, 23, and 41. So what you want to do is, of course, add all the numbers or the scores, the results for all 4 of these questions, add them all up, and then divide them by 4. And this will be your result out of 7. And so you want to do kind of that average for every skill. So I put down all the questions that are associated with a certain skill. So goal setting is question 1, 10, 23, 41. Confidence is question 2, 12, 28, 48. Basically, those are the questions that assess these 12 different mental skills. And so I'll give you maybe 5 minutes to add it all up. And this, again, will give you an average out of 7 for all the skills. So the skills that we assessed today were goal setting, confidence, commitment, stress reaction, fear control, relaxation, activation, imagery, mental practice, focusing, refocusing, and competition planning. So I'll give you the time to do the math. How about maybe 4 minutes-ish to do all that, knowing that, of course, you can do it after the meeting as well. I encourage you to maybe either just take a quick picture of these numbers too, and knowing that I will send the slides, but most likely not right after this meeting. But yeah, so again, goal setting is our ability to set goals. Confidence is our belief in our skills and our capacities. Commitment is your level, of course, of commitment, motivation towards your sport. Stress reactions, how you respond to stress. Fear control, or how you manage the fears involved in your sport. Maybe something that isn't as relevant to your sport, but this is something that we can use in multiple sports. So I think we can think of a lot of sports where that would apply. Sports like gymnastics, diving, a lot of the skiing disciplines, snowboarding, where there's a lot of fear involved. I'm not saying that if you guys if you feel that there's fear in your sport that it isn't valid. I'm just saying that often certain scores come up with certain sports. Relaxation is your ability to bring your level of activation or energy down. Activation is the opposite, so bring your level up. Imagery is your ability to see and visualize. Mental practice is practicing your sport in your head. Focusing, so being able to pay attention to the right cues. Refocusing, being able to come back to the important information when you've been distracted. And then competition planning is having an effective and an adequate plan for your competitions. So we assessed all 12. Again, it will give you an average out of 7. So of course, you can kind of rank all 12 skills from kind of your strengths to all the way down to maybe some of the gaps or the things you want to work on. The highest score, so 7 out of 7 would be the highest. That would mean that is a strength of yours, and of course would be probably at the top of your list when it comes to strengths and skills that you perform well in. And of course, 1 out of 7 would be maybe a gap, something to really work on. I would say that when it comes to this scale, what kind of the literature says or tells us is that anything above a 5 out of 7 is considered great performance for said skill. Not saying that if you get a 6, that it means you can stop working on it, but you might be more so maintaining at this point and wanting to prioritize the skills that are that you've scored below 5. If all your skills and results are above 5, amazing, that's great. You can always find ways to continue to improve. I will say that if all your scores are 7 out of 7, that maybe it would be worth for you to do that again, maybe with just give it a bit more time, a few more practice sessions, a few more matches. We, of course, want to see a bit more nuance often in our answers. So now that we're looking for something specific, but perfection in every skill most likely does not represent really what's happening out there. And not saying that you have tons of gaps, but more so that even your strengths, most likely there are still things that you would benefit from working on. So yeah, so all you guys can do that, finish that up. But yeah, anything above 5 is considered great performance. Anything below 5 does not mean we need to panic or that you're really bad or poor at this, but more so that it would be worth you considering working on these skills. So again, I can send that to you guys afterwards or come back to this slide. But when it comes to building our own mental skills program, right, at this point, what do we want to consider? So we've assessed where we have reflected on where we were. We've reflected on where we want to go, and B, we now know where we are with our assessment and our tool. So therefore, we still need to consider our needs, wants, and demands of our sport. We need it when it comes to building our own plan, consider skills, order, and then also the rest of your yearly training plan. So that means your technical and tactical training plan. And so what I mean by needs, wants, and demands of the sport, well, for one, you need to identify what you want to work on, right? So even with now the assessment, it may have said that the first thing or the priority should be imagery, for example, because you scored a 2 out of 7. If you have no interest for imagery, I would say to maybe take that into consideration when building your plan. Not saying that we should work on things we're not interested in, but if we really aren't interested, then we most likely will not put in the time and effort. So it might be more valuable to prioritize something that you're interested in and that you see the value in and that you really want to put time and effort into. It's also important to consider just shooting in general and your discipline. So there important considerations when it comes to your sport, your level of performance, what's expected of you, what are the demands of your sport, right? So again, I talked about gymnastics, diving, skiing, where fear control is something that we really need to prioritize and keep in mind. Whereas when we think shooting, I often think focus, refocusing, confidence, stress management, right? And so knowing what does your sport demand, because every sport's different. For your sport, relaxation might be a lot more valuable than activation. Whereas if we're talking to a football player, a hockey player, they often want to get their level of activation, or even boxing way up there, right? So activation might be what they need to prioritize. Whereas for you guys, often relaxation, depending on the discipline, will be important. When you're building your plan, what skills to work on first? So now we've identified kind of what or assess where our performance is at this point. So for one, we always want to work on the foundational skills first. It is important to build a strong base. What are our foundational skills? Motivation, that could be motivation or commitment, confidence, and we have here resilience. We can also add goal setting to that. And so all 4 of these skills are key and should be worked on first. And so if you scored quite a low score for confidence, goal setting, or commitment, these are the ones you'll want to prioritize first, because there's no point in talking about stress management if we have low self-confidence. We cannot talk about mental practice if we're not motivated. We cannot talk about competition planning if we do not know how to have goal setting. So foundational skills first. Second, priority will then go to the weaker skills next, right? And so, okay, once I know, okay, I'll work on goal setting. If my other weakest skill might be stress management or stress reactions, that will most likely be the next skill you will work on. Often weaker skills or bigger gaps will need more time than skills that you already master or your strengths. You will then first start with foundational skills. If those you master and they're great, then go to weaker skills first. If there is a foundational skill that you struggle with, you start with that. You go with the other priorities next. And then also you consider competition needs, right? So are there specific skills that you will need for specific competitions? So if I know that I have a competition in 3 months where there will be a lot of noise, a lot of people, then although it might not be a gap, I might want to make it a point to train focus before I go to this said competition. So I also want to take that into consideration, or same thing as if there is this one big competition where it is high in importance, it might lead me to be selected for a certain team, or it's high pressure, high importance, then maybe I want to make, or not maybe, but I will want to make sure that I train stress reactions or relaxation before going to that competition. And then lastly, I want to keep in mind that certain skills can have impact on one another. So again, imagery can be a technique that's used to train other skills. And so if I know I want to train, for example, again, stress reactions, and I also want to train imagery, sometimes it might be best to train imagery first so that I can use imagery as a technique to train stress reactions. And so if I am able to do imagery properly because I've now spent time on it and trained it, I will then be able to, in my mind, see maybe do imagery scenarios for like high stake competitions, high pressure moments, seeing myself being calm, being in control. And so sometimes just keep in mind that certain skills will impact each other, imagery being one of them. And so if I know I want to use imagery as a tool, I may not want for that to be the last skill I work on this year. Maybe I'll bring it up a bit closer, a bit earlier, so that I can use it as a technique. And lastly, you want to consider the rest of your YTP, right? So I don't know if you guys build your own YTPs, if you have a general one, but usually during the prep phase, what you want to do is that's where you'll learn and you'll develop your different mental skills. So maybe new skills, really priorities that are important. On your competition phase, that's when you integrate your mental skills into competitions, right? So it's more so refine, adapt, make sure that it's automatic at this point. When we want to peak, at this point, everything should feel familiar, automated, well-established plan. There's no overthinking. We're not training anything. We're feeling comfortable and good. And when it comes to the recovery phase, then we want to have skills in there that maximize recovery. So skills that align with that, things like relaxation, self-care. Basically, we want to make sure stress management, that the skills that we are working on in the recovery phase maximize recovery. So with all that, and I know it's a lot of information, again, you'll have access to it, but this is sometimes what your mental skills training plan can look like. So it kind of looks very similar to a YTP, what we're used to seeing from a competition standpoint. So again, the competitions, here's meets, so we can assume like with swimming, but like meetings would consist with the consultant, competition or race, and then the week, and then the period, right? General prep, specific prep, pre-competition, competition, and then the different skills, right? So you see that for one, we're starting with goal setting, high priority, and then we're maintaining it, going into self-talk, distraction control, confidence, and relaxation as we get closer to this kind of end of year competition. And so that's kind of what a mental training plan can look like. It does not need to have this structure, but it's just to give you an idea that even the skills that will ultimately become priority later in the year, we're still maintaining, and we're still kind of keeping in mind earlier in the year. It's more so that we're not actively trying to build these skills. So with that being said, again, that's just what we want to do. So please remember that we want to treat mental skills training the same way we do any other type of training, and that hopefully with today, all the information that you've gotten, you feel a bit more comfortable building your own mental skills training program. And not that it has to be looking like this. It could be way more simple, but just to keep in mind, where were you last year? Where do you want to go? Where are you now? What is of interest to you? Kind of keep in mind the order in which we want to work on different skills. So foundational skills first. Next, we go with bigger gaps and priorities. And then we just take into consideration our overall calendar of competition matches. And of course, while still knowing that I've thrown just a lot of information your way, if we can just remember that mental skills training needs to be treated just like any other type of training. And that also by you wanting to prioritize and have identified gaps and strengths, you are now one step further and one step closer to improving your mental performance. And again, this is just to kind of lay out all the groundwork so that we can start talking about different mental skills in January and really equip you guys with now the tools and techniques now that you know what your priorities are and also what the skills that you will be working on. And so I know I've done a lot of talking today, all the talking really. And so I wanted to know, based on the assessment, the reflection questions, what are the skills that you guys want to work on this year? And of course, based on your answers, then that can help me really figure out what we will prioritize in the next meetings. As I said, now that we have the foundation, we know what mental performance is. We know why it is so important. We know what mental skills training and what it requires. We know, or at least have better information or knowledge in terms of building your own mental skills program. I now want to know what will be part of your programs. And those are the skills that we can really look at and address and look into at our next meetings, I should say. Competition planning and activation and relaxation. Amazing. Okay. Awesome. Perfect. So again, we'll give you guys a few minutes to type. If some of you do have to leave, I know it is getting quite late. Feel free to send me all your questions or even your programs by email. I'll be happy to support you in any way. So if any of you have to leave, then thank you guys for joining. Other than, of course, I'll wait to hear and see kind of your answers here. I'll make note of it all. And of course, I will not be, and we will not be able to cover all the different skills and make sure that it aligns with everybody. But we can at least try to prioritize the ones that come up the most often. Coping for if someone or something is being really annoying. Goal setting, confidence, imagery, focusing, refocusing. Amazing. Thank you. Glad to hear that you learned a lot. That's awesome. Okay. Love this, the variety of different skills. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining. Again, you guys are free to go if you do not have any questions, but please, before leaving, let me know what are the skills you want to work on so that I can also help you through these meetings as well, and being able to identify what skills should we prioritize as a group, and what skills should we look into more. Amazing. Thank you. Yes, this is just foundation, and then we'll get to move on to all the fun stuff of all the techniques and the strategies and really working on our mental skills. I will at this point though